Good morning and welcome to COVID lesson number 3. We're talking about the circulatory system today. The system that moves blood around your body. Circulatory system is the main way of delivering oxygen and nutrients to every part of your body. Every single cell in your body has to have access to blood flow. We're going to talk about different kinds of blood vessels and different kinds of cells inside the circulatory system. And then the pathway of blood through the circulatory system. You can see on the flash animation on the right. You can watch that as we go through a couple of introductory slides. I'm going to go through at a rapid pace. You can pause, rewind, and email me if you have any questions and want more detail. Circulatory system can be thought of as the body's massive transport system, moving nutrients, waste, and other materials at super speeds, kind of like a freeway. If you ever get a chance to see Body World's exhibit, look it up. It's a pretty cool traveling show that displays different body systems. That's the circulatory system from a real human being. This is what the circulatory system looks like in and around the lungs and the hand. If you ever get a chance to go to Body Worlds, it's a pretty cool show showing different body systems in real, formerly live human beings. Here are the parts of the heart that we're going to need to know. Just a quick rundown of how it works. Blood comes in from the body. It's colored in blue because when red blood cells are loaded with carbon dioxide, they're a little bit darker, not exactly blue and red like you see on the screen, but they're a little bit darker in color than when they're loaded up with oxygen. So here's the pathway of blood through the body. It comes in through, this is called the vena cava. Vena cava, superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, pours into the right atrium. The heart's divided into 4 chambers. Atrium, the bigger chamber underneath it is called the ventricle. So into the right atrium, then into the ventricle, then it's pumped out of the right ventricle and it goes to the lungs. Remember, the heart sits right in between the 2 lungs. So from the right ventricle, it goes to the left lung and the right lung, and then it comes back from the lungs loaded with oxygen. That's why these are red. It comes back from the lungs loaded with oxygen, and it comes into the left atrium, into the left ventricle, and then it moves through the aorta or the aortic arch to the rest of the body, to bring that oxygen to the rest of the body. It goes out through a network of blood vessels and comes back in the vena cava and starts over. So one more time. Vena cava, right atrium, right ventricle to the lungs, comes back from the lungs loaded with oxygen, left atrium, left ventricle, and up the aorta to the rest of the body. Now there's a reason this aortic arch has 3 branches off of it. Take a guess. Time's up. 1 goes to your head and 1 goes to each arm. So that's it. We're going to look at those parts of the heart in a little bit more detail, but I'll walk you through the pathway one more time on this flash animation. Look on the right-hand side of your screen. So it comes in from the lungs into the left atrium, left ventricle, then that ventricle, a large muscle mass, contracts forcefully to push it through the aorta, up and down to the rest of the body where it drops off the oxygen, picks up carbon dioxide, then it comes back through the veins from the vena cava, through the right atrium, right ventricle. The right ventricle contracts and moves that deoxygenated blood to the lungs where it picks up oxygen and returns into the left ventricle and left atrium and left ventricle. You're wondering why it looks like I've got my rights and lefts mixed up on the screen. Remember, we're looking at this heart as if a person is facing you. So when they are facing you, their right-hand side is on your left, and their left-hand side is on your right. So I'll move on. I'll leave that flash animation playing on the side. You can take a look at that while we go through the parts. Right atrium takes in blood low in oxygen from the body. The right ventricle sends the blood low in oxygen to the lungs. You can pause there to record that in your notes. I'm going to move on. Left atrium takes in blood rich in oxygen. This is blood that's just coming from the lungs. Left ventricle, that's the biggest, strongest compartment of the heart because it has to push blood all the way through the whole body. When the left ventricle contracts, that sends blood up the aortic arch to everywhere in the body. There are the 4 chambers of the heart that you need to know. Moving on to the 3 types of blood vessels: arteries, veins, and capillaries. Arteries are blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart. The blood in them is oxygen rich and is bright red in color. That's true most of the time. Remember that it's also an artery that goes to the lungs, you'll see on this animation. So this artery, it's going to the lungs. It's called the pulmonary artery. And when the artery is going to the lungs, it's not red. That blood is depleted in oxygen and it's blue. But the biggest artery right here going to the main rest of the body, it is oxygen rich and it's blood, it's red in color. Remember the 2 A's go together. Arteries go away from the body. That is arteries go away from the heart. That is always true. Arteries go away and that is always true. And in the case of the aorta, the arteries branching off of the aorta are oxygen rich and bright red in color. Veins carry the blood back to the heart. So the vena cava, same Latin word for vein, the vena cava, which is a big vein, brings blood back to the heart. So arteries carry blood away from the heart, veins carry blood back to the heart, and the capillaries are the bridge in between. The capillaries branch off all the way down to just 1 cell in thickness. I'll show you a picture in a minute. You can pause here and fill in the definition. Artery has a thick muscle lining because all of the pressure driving the whole circulatory system has to move through arteries first. So when these ventricles contract, they blast that blood through these muscle-lined arteries at a pressure even more than you've got in your mountain bike tires. In fact, about 3 times the pressure that you have in your car tires or your mountain bike tires. And if you've ever heard a tire pop on a bike, you can imagine how violent it would be if one of these arteries burst, because they're subject to, well, in case you know about the measurements for blood pressure, they're subject to about 120 psi of pressure, sometimes more when you're exercising. Now, by the time the arteries branch off into smaller and smaller capillaries, there's not a lot of pressure left draining that blood back through the veins. So they don't need to be as thick, muscle-lined. The pressure in the veins kind of trickles its way back to the heart at a much reduced pressure. So lots of pressure in the arteries. That's why they have this tough muscle lining. In the veins, much less muscle lining because there's much less pressure. It's in the capillaries, and this is one of the places we've already seen capillaries, and we've already seen red blood cells coming by and exchanging, in this case, gases through the alveoli. So these are the capillaries, sometimes 1 single cell thick. I'll leave the alveoli pumping oxygen on the side. I mean, diffusing oxygen on the side. Your blood is made up of at least 3 major parts. Each part plays a specific role in your health. Here are the red blood cells. They make up the most significant volume of your blood. They carry oxygen to the rest of your body, and equally important, they carry the carbon dioxide away. Doesn't do you any good to keep bringing fuel if you don't get rid of the exhaust. So red blood cells do both. They carry oxygen to the rest of your body, and they have to carry that carbon dioxide away. That's kind of what they look like. Next up is the white coconut-looking timbit. And that is a white blood cell that's specialized in fighting off invaders, diseases, and infections like the COVID virus. And we've talked a little bit about this when we were talking about respiratory system. It's the white blood cell response to the damage that the virus causes that actually causes COVID, which stands for coronavirus disease. COVID. Coronavirus disease is caused when these white blood cells are called to the scene of an invasion. When that coronavirus starts attacking cells in your alveoli, some of these alveoli cells start to die. White blood cells rush to the scene and actually flood the inside of the alveoli. They're trying to take care of the infection, but in the process, they flood the alveoli, and actually patients start to drown because that fluid from the circulatory system swells up the respiratory system, and the surface area that's usually used for oxygen absorption ends up literally underwater. So that's the white blood cells. Normally, they do their job by showing up at the scene and eating the virus. That's usually how they work. White blood cells are specialized cells that fight off invaders, disease, and infection. Then there are platelets, cells in the blood that help to stop the bleeding at cuts. They spin this sticky web to trap blood cells inside. Platelets are kind of like tiny little vials of crazy glue that float around inside your bloodstream. And every now and then, if there's an injury in the circulatory system, that vial of crazy glue smashes open. And this is sort of what it looks like inside a cut. When that blood vessel is damaged, these platelets flock to the scene and start spinning that sticky web across the cut to first prevent blood loss. Then the skin cells will eventually regenerate and grow over the opening. But it's the platelets that first show up to stop the bleeding and cause a scab. A scab is a coagulation. Basically, that's platelets doing their job. Some other things that can go wrong in the circulatory system. Diets that are high in fat increase the amount of cholesterol in the body, and these fatty acids build up in the blood. And over time, cholesterol deposits build up on the wall of the arteries. This buildup of cholesterol is known as atherosclerosis. And it sort of looks like a cup of melted butter is just filling the arteries, and that's very much actually similar to what it is. The blood vessels get narrower and narrower and narrower, and eventually, especially if those blood vessels feed these muscles around the heart, well, that muscle around the heart is going to start to die if it doesn't get fed enough. That can cause a couple things. It can cause a heart attack from blood starvation, or if you get a tiny clot floating through the circulatory system that might eventually go on away on its own, all of a sudden, where it would normally float straight through this coronary artery, if that coronary artery is narrowed with cholesterol deposits, that clot will get stuck. This clot can cause a heart attack. Another day, I'll tell you the story about me getting defibrillated, there's an electrical signal that runs from your atrium to your ventricle. Your atrium contracts first, loading up the ventricles. That stretch stimulus in these muscles causes the ventricles to forcefully contract. And that electrical signal in my heart got all mixed up a couple of times, and the atrium and the ventricles were firing out of sync, and my heart rate got really irregular, and my pulse was really goofy, and I had to go into the emergency room and get the paddles, and it was quite an experience. I'll tell you about when you stop by sometime, either at the end of this school year or come back next year, and I'll tell you about getting defibrillated. It feels just exactly like it looks on the movies. That's it for the circulatory system. Email me questions, fill in the notes, and work through your assessment questions later in the week. Miss you. Have a great day.